The Holocaust was not a single event. It did not happen all at once. It was the result of circumstances and events, as well as individual decisions, played out over years. Key political, moral, and psychological lines were crossed until the Nazi leadership eventually set in motion the unimaginable, a concrete, systemic plan to annihilate all of Europe's Jews. Shalom. I'm Cantor Jeff Fine, and on behalf of Temple Beth El, I want to welcome you all to this day, this evening of memorial, this memorial remembrance of those who died in the Shoah, in the Holocaust. In English, we refer to the destruction as the Holocaust. The Holocaust comes from the Greek word holocauston, which is a translation of the Hebrew word olah. During biblical times, an olah was a type of sacrifice to God that was totally consumed or burnt by fire. Over time, the word Holocaust came to be used with reference to large-scale slaughter and destruction. The Hebrew word shoah, which has the connotation of a whirlwind of destruction, was first used in 1940 to refer to the extermination of the Jews of Europe in a booklet published in Jerusalem by the United Aid Committee for the Jews of Poland. The book was titled Shoat Yehudei Polin, The Holocaust of the Jews of Poland. Besides Shoah and Holocaust, many Yiddish-speaking Jews use the term churban, which also means destruction or catastrophe. And our service this evening, we will hear about many of the women in the Holocaust. We will hear music. We will hear beautiful words. Start with words. These words come from our Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, who passed only recently, and he wrote this poem for the Holocaust. We begin here. This evening, on Yom HaShoah, we remember the victims of the greatest crime of man against man, the young, the old, the innocent, the 1.5 million children, starved, shot, given lethal injections, gassed, burned, and turned to ash, because they were deemed guilty of the crime of being different. We remember what happens when hate takes hold of the human heart and turns it to stone. What happens when victims cry for help and there is no one listening? What happens when humanity fails to recognize that those who are not in our image are nonetheless in God's image? We remember and pay tribute to the survivors who bore witness to what happened and to the victims, so that robbed of their lives, they would not be robbed of their deaths. We remember and give thanks to the righteous of the nations who saved lives, often at risk of their own, teaching us how in the darkest night we can light a candle of hope. We call on you, Almighty God, to help us hear your voice that says in every generation, do not murder, do not stand by the blood of your neighbor, do not oppress the stranger. We know that We know that while we do not have the ability to change the past, we can change the future. We know that whilst we cannot bring this, uh, those who have died back to life, we can ensure their memories live on and that their deaths were not in vain. And so, on this Yom HaShoah, we commit ourselves to one simple act: Yizkor, remember. May the souls of the victims be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. And we say, Amen. We now prepare with, as we read these words from the screen of Holocaust survivor Dan Page's, which he wrote in a sealed railway car. He wrote, "Here in this carload I am Eve with Abel my son. If you see my other son, Cain, son of man, tell him that I..." And now we move to the lighting of the candles. We prepare to light 6 candles in remembrance of the 6 million Jews murdered during the Shoah. If you do not have 6 candles, you can light 1 candle to remember the extinguishing of one soul created by God. We read first these words. We kindle these lights in memory of the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. May the memory of the righteous be for a blessing. Zichronam livracha. May they be remembered. Now I invite you to light your 6 candles. In 2013, under the guidance of then Cantor and Director of Education Leah Elstein of blessed memory, she had the religious school students place 6,000 yellow flags on the lawn in front of the temple to help them understand the enormity of life lost. The yellow flags represent the stars of David that the Jews were made to wear to identify them. And these 6,000 flags represent the 6 million Jews that were murdered. That tradition has continued. The flags will stay up for a week. Even during COVID, volunteers from our community in staggered groups placed each individual flag into the ground. Our thanks to our current Director of Education, Leslie Bright, and Rabbinic Intern, Nina King-Madlam, for organizing this necessary display. For tonight's service, we focus on the women of the Holocaust. Why? Because their stories are often overlooked or eclipsed by the story of men during the Holocaust. The women you will hear about tonight were average, normal, caring, gentle, determined, strong, life-loving. I've divided their stories up into different themes, which include women in the arts, women caring for others, womanhood, food, and love. We begin with women in the arts. As you can see, poet Selma Meerbaum Eisinger, she was born in 1924 and she died in 1942. She was 18 years old. She was uh, born in Bukowina, Austria, and she died from typhoid in the labor camp Mikhailovska in the Ukraine. Her parents, also at that labor camp, died shortly after she died, also of typhoid. The work of Selma Bierbaum Eisinger's includes 57 poems in German, which have been summarized from a handwritten album which was dedicated to her friend Liza Fischmann. Selma's cousin on her mother's side is also a poet, the renowned poet and Holocaust survivor Paul Celan, a pseudonym for his real name, which was Paul Anschel. As you'll see, this beautiful first poem is called Longing Song, and I'm going to read it in German, and you'll be able to see the translation right next to me. Leise schlägst in deinem Lied du einem Ton an und dir ist, als fehlte noch etwas, und du suchst verwirrt bei allen Tönen, ob sie dir nicht sagen können, was zu finden, wo und wie und wann. Doch der eine ist zu blass, und zu lüstern ist der zweite, und der dritte ist so voll mit Weite, viel zu voll. Du suchst lange, Moll und Dur und Moll werden lebend unter deinen Händen. Und dann schlägst du plötzlich eine Taste an und es kommt kein Ton. Und das Schweigen ist dir wie ein dumpfer Hohn, denn du weißt es plötzlich ganz genau. Dieser fällt dir, wenn in deine Händen wenden, fiel er ab von deinem Lied der Bahn, war das Ende nicht mehr leer und grau. Und du rührst und rührst die Taste, fragst dich, wo hier wohl die Hemmung liegt, suchst, ob nicht doch deine Hände weiche Sicht, deine Augen betteln voll Verlangen. Kein Ton kommt, Einsamkeit bleibt nun zu Gaste in dem Lied, das dir so schwer und süß gereift. Um den ungespielten Ton wirst du nun ewig bangen, bangen um das Glück, das dich nur leicht gestreift in dein leisen Nächten, wenn der Mond dich wiegt und die Stille deine Tränen nicht begreift. Another poet who wrote in the camps was Elena Monkova. She was born in 1926 in Prague, and she began writing as a youth at Terezin. She says about herself, as a half-breed, I was allowed to stay in Terezin and not be moved. It protected me from further transport. Mainly I wrote. These trifles, various poems, Mostly they involved reminiscences, for example, about a girlfriend, Olga, that had remained in Prague, or laments over what I had lost. There were all these sentimental things with tendencies towards romantic expressions. After the war, there was a reunion of girls from Terratzen, and they said, "Listen, we were always thinking about food, and you were writing poems. We used to say to ourselves that you aren't normal." She survived and settled in Israel, but her entire family was murdered. She went on to work in film and theater. And here is one of her beautiful poems dedicated to Olga. Listen, the boat whistle has sounded now, and we must sail out toward an unknown port. We'll sail a long, long way, and dreams will turn to truth. Oh, how sweet the name Morocco! Listen, now it's time. The wind sings songs of far away, and look up to heaven and think about the violets. Listen, now it's time. Here is a first song called Monotone, and it is to remember Selma and Elena's gifts of words through poetry. They shall not be forgotten. Roi ohne Kalt in die Euferener Schluchz, monoton, monoton. Auf deinem ungezeugenem, euch verworfenem Tod, verahnt heigt mein Topelt ich. Die Hand ist schon gelegt. Der Tod hat durchgeschnitten heut, ohne Fleisch, ohne Weg dem Bein. Bald monoton, monoton. Women caring for others. Women who had lost their families found some consolation in caring for others. They risked their lives and health by treating contagious patients and children in hiding places. Many went to their death with the children, although they could have been saved. They toiled from morning to night as the situation deteriorated with each passing moment, not allowing their physical weakness to abate their efforts. Stefania Wilczynska was born in 1886 in Poland. She completed her studies at the University of Liège, Belgium. In 1909, she met Dr. Janusz Korczak, and the two formed a bond. At the onset of World War I, Korczak was enlisted, and Stefania was left to run the orphanage, which had expanded and housed 150 children. In 1935, she visited the land of Israel and lived at Ein Harod until 1939. With the Nazi occupation, the members of Ein Harod arranged for Stefania to leave Poland, but she declined and instead moved to the Warsaw Ghetto along with Dr. Korczak and the children. The letter to her husband in 1940 was the last correspondence with him. She never saw him again. On August 5th, 1942, the order to deport the orphans was handed down. Stefania, Dr. Korzak, and the other staff members marched with the 192 orphans to the Umschlagplatz, with Stefania in charge of the group of 9 to 12-year-old children. They were transported together with those children to the gas chambers of Treblinka, all were murdered. The letter to her husband says, "My dear, we are well. I work a little at the orphanage while Kozak is doing a great deal. I've not arrived because I do not want to leave without the children. Yours, Stefa, April 2nd, 1940." A song, Numi Numi, to remember Stefania's gift of protecting the children. She shall not be forgotten. Nomi, nomi, aldati, nomi, nomi, nim, nomi, nomi, ktanati, nomi, nomi, nim. Abba halach le'avoda, halach, halach Abba. Yashuv, Yashuv, im tzeit halevana, yavi lach matana. Nomi, nomi, aldati, nomi, nomi, nom, nomi, nomi, ktanani, nomi, nomi. Womanhood. Women were stripped of being complete human beings. By removing women's hair, including body hair at Auschwitz, the Nazis deconstructed their personalities. When the women exited the so-called sauna, they had to marshal all their inner forces and reconstruct their personalities so that they could feel like a person. Some women used their sexuality to survive or in order to earn a favor, to save a family member, to obtain a slice of bread. From their standpoint, it was just another way to stay alive. Looking good during the Holocaust also carried meaning of life. Before selections, women smeared on their cheeks whatever remained of the rouge that they had safeguarded with extreme care, and they shared it with their mothers and friends. This makeup became a lifesaver. Even after it became impossible to keep one's clothing and body clean, women continued to try, washing themselves in freezing water if they were fortunate enough to have the opportunity, even in the midst of the harshest European winters. They survived by their strength and their fierce determination as women. Dita Kirshner-Segal was born in Vienna in 1930, and she survived Auschwitz, Belsenkirchen, Sommerda, and immigrated to Israel. Here is Ditka's remembrance of the sauna as Jewish prisoner, number 13088, and the shorning of her hair in testimony that she gave in 2006. She says, "I remember that we stood naked in the sauna, in line to have our hair removed, and I wondered, what are all these men doing here? We couldn't recognize one another anymore. I approached one of the Jewish guards and asked him if he would have a word with someone so that they wouldn't cut off my pigtails, and he replied that so long as I had a head, hair would grow, while if I didn't have a head, I wouldn't need hair anymore." Women retained their femininity no matter what, even on the brink of death. The prisoners asked seamstresses to cut fitted prisoner gowns and blouses and to add collars and cufflinks to enhance their appearance. Penina Arkin, born in 1927 in Cluj-Napoca, Romania, and at Auschwitz, remembers the camp commander, SS Sturmbannführer Hirsch, who found out about the alterations. He burst into the sewing shop and roared at us, "You Jew bitches, you're sentenced to death and you're being coquettish?" On the screen, you see Penina Arkin's fitted prison garb, and you see it adorned with a simple orange bead. During sessions of selection for who would live and who would die, women would apply that rouge and lipstick, and even when they were at the end of their lives, they did it to remind themselves of their femininity and their humanity, and their spirit and their strength is something that we will never forget. A song, Bimakom, to remember Ditka and Penina, their strength, inner beauty, as well as their outer beauty. They shall not be forgotten. Imakom shein anashim Hillel omer ishtadel liot ish במקום שאין אנשים, הלל אומר, השתדל להיות להיות איש במקום שאין אנשים, להיות איש במקום שאין אנשים, אין אנשים, אין אנשים. Food. Hunger was one of the grimmest phenomena of the Holocaust for its victims. It was severe, protracted, and relentless, a black hole in the body that offered no respite. It affected people and caused them to act in ways from which they would presumably flinch otherwise. Hunger was the partner of disease. Together they claimed more victims' lives than any cause other than murder. Hunger and disease fed each other in a vicious cycle, of course. Had the victims not been so weak, they would not have become so ill, and so forth. Trude Kasowitz was born in 1907 in Fiume, Austro-Hungary. She lived with her husband Oskar in Vienna. In March 1944, both were sent to various camps in Yugoslavia and Hungary. Eventually, Trude was deported to Birkenau. She was able to obtain paper and writing implements at her workplace, Komando Konada, where people's belongings were sorted. Her husband and her parents perished. Trude died in 2002 in the United States. In her own words regarding food and hunger, "I'd pretend to visit someone as her guest, and she'd pretend to serve me coffee and cake. She would share a recipe and I'd write it down. We did it to overcome the sense of hunger. You see Trude's friend's nutcake recipe that she wrote down from her guest. A song, Lekoved Shabbos, to remember Trude and those like Trude, and for her comforting of her hosts. One recipe at a time, this song, Lekoved Shabbos. Lekoved Shabbos, Lekoved Shabbos, Freitag zu Nacht, essen wir alle Fisch, ohne Zimtzopf und Pasternak, ohne Zimtzopf und Merlech, ohne Kischkele, ohne Kischkele euchet. Kischkele heist du in Oiven, schäst du in Moilze, gehst du Lekoved Shabbos. Kugele heist du in Moil zu gehst du, in Oiven justest du Lekoved Shabbos. Shabbos Kodesh, Shabbos Kodesh, Shabbos, Shabbos in der Früh. Essen wir alle Pitscha, ohne Kaschkele von Bebelech, ohne Kaschkele von Arbeslech, ohne Kugele, ohne Kugele euchet. Kugele heist du in Oiven, schäst du in Moilze, gehst du Lekoved Shabbos. Kugele heist du in Oiven, schäst du in Moilze, gehst du Lekoved Shabbos. Shabbos Kodesh, Shabbos Kodesh, Shabbos, Shabbos zu Nacht. Essen wir kalte Fisch, ohne Tegezopf und Lochschelach, ohne Tegezopf und Farfelech, ohne Fledele, ohne Fledele euchet. Fledele heist du in Oiven, schäst du in Moilze, gehst du Lekoved Shabbos. Fledele heist du, in Oiven stehst du, in Moilze gehst du Lekoved Shabbos. Love. People did not know what the next hour, let alone the next day, would bring. Accordingly, they tried to establish settings that would give them the illusion of stability. People fell in love in the most implausible places. People married even though they did not know whether they would be able to survive individually or together, let alone establish a nest. They felt the need to make their marriages official, sometimes as protection against deportation to the East, and sometimes due to the wish to be deported together. They felt the need to follow the traditional wedding rituals, affixing a Jewish star to a white dress or a fancy suit that had survived from bygone days, and to commemorate in a photograph the bride, the groom, and the happy family gathered around. Concurrently, there was couplehood, quick and provisional assignations that often reflected a need for protection from the surroundings, as occurred among the partisans. At other times, it expressed a psychological need for warmth and understanding in the face of the vileness all around. Krysia Salek, born in 1922, married Solomon Salek Kuczynski in the Sonozwiec ghetto. When the ghetto was liquidated, the young people were sent to the Annaberg camp, where they labored at preparing equipment for the army. About 1 year later, Solomon was transferred to Blechhammer camp. Krysia was later transferred to Peterswald camp, and their communication was broken off. Solomon died during the death march to Buchenwald. Krysia survived. She remarried and in 1946 moved to Israel. A letter from Salek to Krysia while they were in separate camps. He and Krysia corresponded through letters passed along by a German kitchen worker whom they had bribed. Dear Krysia, I received a letter that you wrote together with Sabian, her mother. All of the letters and greetings made me feel very happy. Please write to me with lots of details about how you're living. Krysinku, if it means having to deny yourself something, don't do it. In any event, write me, describing how you look these days. I'm healthy and feeling well. Krysia, I miss you very much. I think we'll be seeing one another soon. Don't laugh. I'm giving you a big kiss. Salek. A song to remember Krysia and Salek and their strength in the loving marriage cut short. They will not be forgotten. I'm happy to have my husband Joel sing the next piece with me, A Malach Weint.
Amalek weint, Amalek weint, und bedeckt die Groß mit Teu. Liebster meiner, ich denk noch dir azoi. Liebster meiner, ich denk noch dir azoi. Es ist mein Bett mit Puchgebett, und ich wage sich auf Streu. Liebster meiner, ich denk noch dir azoi. Liebster meiner, ich denk noch dir azoi. Nacht gewahrt, es kommt herein der Tag scheint grau. Liebster meiner, ich denk noch dir azoi. Liebster meiner, ich denk noch dir azoi.
And now I'll ask you to please rise for the El Malei Rachamim prayer as we remember the 6 million Jews and those of other religions, all sexualities, all political beliefs, all those considered imperfect, all our fellow human beings that died. We rise. מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר רקיע מזהירים את נשמות 6,000,000 אחינו ואחיותינו שנגעו קידוש השם בעל הרחמים יסתירם בשאת כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום בשלום על משכבם ונאמר Fully compassionate God on high, to our 6,000,000 brothers and sisters murdered because they were Jews, and all the others that were murdered, grant clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold them in the embrace of your wings. Secure their souls in eternity. Adonai, they are yours. They will rest in peace. Amen. I'll ask you to remain standing as we say the Mourner's Kaddish. This Mourner's Kaddish for Yom HaShoah was written by Elie Wiesel and includes the names of the concentration camps. Yitgadal Auschwitz, V'yitkadash Lodz, Shemei Rabbah Honar, Ve'almal Divrach Yerutei Abiyar, Ve'yim Lich Malchutei, Maidanek, Bechayechon, Uvyomechon, Birkenau, Uvchaye Decho Beit Yisrael, Kovno, Be'al Gala Uvizman Kariv, Kovno, Yanovska V'imru, Amen. Yehe Shmei Rabba Mevarach Le'olam U'almei Almaya, Yitbarach Ve'yishtabach Theresienstadt, Ve'yitpa'ar Ve'yitromam Buchenwald, Ve'yitnaseh Ve'yithadar Treblinka, Ve'yit'aleh Ve'yithalal Vilna, Shmei Dekudisha Rich Hu Bergen-Belsen, Le'ela Mauthausen, Min Kol Birchata V'Shirata Dachau, Tushbechata V'Nechemata Minsk. Dam Yoran Be'alma V'Imru Warsaw. Amen. Yehe Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'Chayim Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Please be seated. Our closing words are by Avraham Shlonsky, significant and dynamic Israeli poet and editor. He was influential in the development of modern Hebrew and its literature, and these words resonate so strongly here at the end of our service. Read with me. In the presence of eyes which witnessed the slaughter, which saw the oppression the heart could not bear, and as witnesses the heart that once taught compassion until the days came to pass that crushed human feeling, I have taken an oath to remember it all, to remember, not once to forget. Forget not one thing to the last generation, when degradation shall cease to the last, to its ending, when the rod of instruction shall have come to conclusion. An oath, not in vain, passed over the night of terror. An oath, no morning shall see me at flesh pots again. An oath, lest from this we learned nothing. And now I invite you to depart in silence. We say, Zichronam livracha, may their names and their gifts and their life and their spirit always be for a blessing. Again, thank you for coming and being a witness tonight.